My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old, and this is how I burned down the life of the man who told me to calm down. I'm parked across from the courthouse, engine off, fingers tight around the steering wheel. The glass doors glint in the late morning sun, reflecting back a version of me I almost don't recognize. Hair pulled into a sharp knot, blazer pressed so perfectly it could cut. My lips are painted the kind of red that looks like a warning sign. The air in my car is thick, clinging to me. The smell of gasoline still lingers on my skin, seeping into the fibers of my jacket no matter how many times I rub my hands together. It's not overpowering yet, but it's there, like the ghost of something dangerous. My phone keeps buzzing in the cup holder, the screen lighting up with messages I don't have the patience to read. I know what they'll say. Emily, are you sure about this? Or please, just think. But thinking is what got me trapped for years. Today isn't about thinking. Somewhere in the distance, I can hear muffled shouts, not panicked, not yet, but the kind of noise that comes before the real chaos. People moving faster than usual, whispers turning into questions. Inside that courthouse, he's sitting with his lawyer, probably sipping coffee, probably wearing that smug, condescending smirk that used to make me want to scream. He has no idea. Not about the papers I've filed, not about the phone calls I've made, not about the fact that in the next 24 hours he will lose everything. His business, already compromised. His so-called best friends, about to discover what kind of man he really is. His angelic reputation. The loving husband facade he parades for cameras and clients. I'm about to grind it into the dirt. The funny thing is, I didn't start this as revenge. Not at first. I started with the simple, pitiful goal of just surviving him. But survival turns into something else when you realize the only reason he's still standing is because you were holding him up. And the moment you let go, well, people always tell women to calm down. They think it's a kindness. It isn't. Calm is what you give to people you trust. And I didn't trust him anymore. The leather of my seat creaks as I lean forward, sliding my phone into my pocket. I check my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. My pulse is steady, my breathing even. Outside, the sun feels warmer than it should, the kind of warmth that makes the air shimmer. I step out, heels clicking against the pavement, each sound pulling me closer to the glass doors. I can already picture his face when he sees me, that flicker of confusion, the tightening in his jaw, the dawning realization that I'm not here to beg, plead, or cry. I'm here to watch him crumble. I push the courthouse doors open, and for the first time in months, I'm walking straight toward him. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where the grocery store cashier knows your father's cholesterol numbers, and every scandal spreads faster than the weather report. Reputation wasn't just currency there, it was survival. You learned early to smile when you didn't mean it, to say, I'm fine, even when you weren't, and to pretend you didn't hear the whispers. I was the dependable one, the girl who stayed late after choir practice to stack chairs, who covered shifts at the diner when someone's kid got sick, who remembered birthdays and baked cookies for neighbors without being asked. People liked me, sure, but they didn't really see me. I was reliable, not remarkable, solid, not sparkling. Then came Mark Reynolds. He wasn't from our town originally, which, in a place like ours, made him automatically interesting. Tall, with easy confidence and a voice that made even the most mundane good morning sound like a promise. He owned Reynolds Construction, and within a year of moving here, he'd somehow become the town's golden boy. He donated to local charities, sponsored the high school football team, even helped fix the church roof at cost. People adored him. I met him at a Chamber of Commerce mixer I hadn't even wanted to attend. I was there because my boss thought I should get out more. He found me by the snack table, handed me a drink, and told me I had the kind of smile that makes people want to stay a while. I laughed, awkward, caught off guard, and he didn't look away. For months, he courted me like it was a full-time job. Coffee deliveries at work, notes left on my windshield, inviting me to lunch, then dinner, then weekends at the lake. He told me I grounded him, that I was his anchor in a world full of noise. I wanted to believe that. We married a year and a half later. It was one of those perfectly staged small town weddings. Twinkle lights, mason jars, the whole Pinterest ready dream. We bought a fixer-upper on the edge of town with a sagging porch and wild roses that tangled around the fence. He talked about how we'd renovate it together. We'd have kids, 2 or 3, maybe 4 if God blessed us. We'd travel someday, maybe Italy or Greece, once the business was really thriving. At first, life was good. Not perfect, but good. He'd work long days at the company, come home smelling like sawdust and motor oil, and we'd eat dinner on the porch, talking about paint colors and baby names. I ran the office side of his business, invoices, payroll, scheduling. It felt like we were building something real, something ours. But the cracks showed early, and I told myself they were nothing. He'd talk over me in conversations, like my words were just background noise. If I questioned a decision, about the business, about the house, about anything, he'd sigh, rub his temples and say, "You're overreacting, Em. Calm down." At first, I laughed it off. Everyone has their quirks, right? And Mark could be so charming when he wanted to be, bringing home flowers, holding my hand at church, telling me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. But little by little, his charm became selective. Publicly, he was affectionate, generous, quick to brag about me. Privately, he could turn cold in an instant. If I brought up money concerns, he'd tell me I didn't understand how business worked. If I was upset about something he said, he'd twist it until I was the one apologizing. It was subtle, the kind of thing that doesn't leave bruises but still leaves marks. And because I loved him, I kept making excuses. I trusted him with everything, our finances, our future. I believed we were a team. I believed that when he said, "We're in this together," he meant it. I didn't know back then that I was working for him, not with him. That while I was balancing the books and keeping the office running, he was balancing a completely different set of accounts. Ones I didn't have the passwords to. I didn't know that the man who told me I was his anchor was already planning how to let go. By the time the truth started to surface, it was too late for calm conversations or quiet fixes. What he did wasn't a single betrayal, but a slow erosion, years of chipping away at my trust until there was nothing left but the rubble he stood on, smiling for everyone else. That's the thing about small towns. They'll forgive almost anything, as long as you keep smiling. Mark was a master at smiling, but I had finally stopped. It started with an envelope. I was in the office late one Tuesday, sorting through invoices and supplier statements, when I noticed it, tucked halfway under the blotter on Mark's desk. Heavy cream paper, my name nowhere on it, his scrawled across the front in that cocky, rushed handwriting he used when signing contracts. I hesitated. We didn't keep secrets, or so I thought. I slid it open. Inside was a folded receipt from a boutique hotel 2 hours away. Not just a room charge, dinners, champagne, chocolate covered strawberries. The date on the receipt stopped me cold. 3 months ago, a Thursday, he'd been away at a business conference in Columbus. For a moment, my brain did this frantic gymnastics routine, trying to land on any explanation that wasn't the obvious one. Maybe it was for a client. Maybe one of his guys needed a room. Maybe he'd booked it for a supplier who got stuck in town. Mark was generous like that, wasn't he? But the questions wouldn't stop crawling under my skin. I slipped the receipt into my purse. That night, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. I told myself I was just going to look at his calendar, see if the hotel date lined up with anything. But the screen lit up with a new message before I could even tap. It was from Sophie. Sophie, the 23-year-old intern who'd joined our company last summer. Fresh out of community college, blonde, bobbly, the kind of girl people described as sweet as pie. The message was short. Can't stop thinking about last time. You make me feel so bad, in the best way. I didn't mean to, but I opened the thread. There they were, dozens of messages, pictures, explicit details, little inside jokes they'd clearly been sharing for months. He told her things he'd never said to me, not even in our best years. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, I was standing there holding his phone like it was a weapon. Want to explain this? I asked. My voice was shaking, but it was quiet, controlled. He glanced at the screen, then at me, and God help me, he smirked. Calm down, Em. You're embarrassing yourself. That was it. No shock, no guilt, no fumbling for a lie. Just that same infuriating, patronizing calm. I pressed him. Who is she to you, Mark? And don't say she's just an intern. She is just an intern, he said, shrugging like we were talking about the weather. You're insecure, that's the problem. You've been paranoid for months. You twist everything into something it's not. Gaslighting, they call it. I'd read about it in articles, seen it in movies, but there's nothing like living it, watching someone rewrite your reality while you're standing in it. By the end of the night, I was the one in tears, apologizing for jumping to conclusions. And he went to bed early, alone. A week later, I came home from a grocery run to find a thick envelope on the kitchen counter. Divorce papers. No warning, no conversation. The part that gutted me wasn't just the betrayal. It was the speed of it. He'd already filed. He'd already spoken to a lawyer. And Sophie? She was already living in my house. My clothes still in the closet. My coffee mug still on the counter. And there she was, padding around in bare feet like she owned the place. Our friends, our mutual friends, didn't even call me. I found out through Facebook posts and sideways glances at the diner. People still waved at him on the street. They bought his side of the story because he was Mark Reynolds. Charming, generous, couldn't hurt a fly Mark. I was the bitter ex-wife, the one who couldn't handle losing him, the one making up stories because she was jealous of the new girl. They didn't see the hotel receipt. They didn't read the messages. They didn't feel the way the air left the room when the man you trusted with everything looked you in the eye and told you your pain wasn't real. I didn't say a word to defend myself, not because I couldn't, but because I was already planning how I'd burn the whole thing down, and I wasn't going to warn him. I didn't just lose my husband. I lost my footing. The days after the divorce papers blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. I'd wake at 3 a.m., heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, my mind replaying every conversation we'd ever had, every glance I'd ignored, every little moment that, looking back, wasn't little at all. I stopped eating. Coffee became both my breakfast and dinner. I dropped 15 pounds in 3 weeks without trying, my clothes hanging on me like they belonged to someone else. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and almost not recognize myself, not just because I looked gaunt, but because my eyes were sharp now, mean even. Then came the final kick. I learned he was draining our joint business account. At first, I thought it was just cash flow trouble. Construction was seasonal after all. But when I checked, the withdrawals were too frequent, too big, and all marked personal transfer. I confronted him in a text, and his reply made my blood run cold. You've already stolen enough. This is just me protecting my assets. It didn't matter that I'd never taken a dime from him. He was already rewriting the narrative, painting me as some greedy, unhinged ex-wife who couldn't be trusted with her own signature. My parents tried to help in the only way they knew how. Emily, my mother said over tea one night, take the high road. People will see the truth eventually. I wanted to believe that. But I knew the truth. Mark wasn't the kind of man people saw clearly. He was the kind of man who made you doubt your own eyes. If I stayed passive, he wouldn't just ruin my reputation. He'd erase me completely. Then came the cafe. It was a Thursday morning, bitter cold, the kind where your breath looks like smoke. I ducked into the corner cafe to escape the wind, and there she was, Sophie, sitting at a table by the window. Her hair was perfectly curled, nails freshly painted, a latte in one hand like she'd been born holding it. She saw me before I could look away and smiled. I should have walked out. I should have ignored her, but I didn't. She stood, smoothed her sweater, and crossed the room with a confidence that made my skin crawl. Emily, she said almost warmly, I'm glad I ran into you. I didn't answer. She tilted her head, her voice soft but dripping with condescension. We just want peace. You should move on. It's better for everyone. Peace. That single word lodged in my chest like a splinter. We want peace. Not you. Not me. We. Like she and Mark were some unified front, and I was the problem to be removed so their happily ever after could be unbothered. If they wanted peace, I'd give them chaos. That was the morning everything shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee in her face, though I thought about it. I just smiled, small, tight, and walked past her without another word, because right then, in that moment, I knew the war would be silent until it wasn't. I started small. My years as Mark's office manager had been more than just answering phones and scheduling contractors. I knew the passwords. I knew the filing system. I knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively, but possibly also literally if you counted some of the subcontractors he dealt with. One rainy Saturday, I let myself into the old office. The locks hadn't been changed. I went straight to the archives, file cabinets in the back, dusty and crammed with years of contracts, invoices, and internal memos. It was all still there, inflated invoices from subcontractors who owed him favors, under-the-table cash payments to avoid taxes, and contracts he doctored after they were signed. I found emails where he threatened suppliers into lowering their bids, using personal information he shouldn't have had. Then came the smoking gun. 3 separate complaints from female employees about inappropriate comments and unwanted touching, all quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. And Sophie? She wasn't just an intern. She'd been promoted to client relations specialist 2 weeks before the first message I'd seen on his phone. A promotion with a salary nearly double mine. I started scanning everything, thousands of pages, saving them to a flash drive I kept taped under my kitchen drawer. I didn't take originals. I wasn't sloppy. I wanted him to think I'd faded quietly into the background. At night, I'd lie awake, my chest tight with grief 1 minute and electric with adrenaline the next. Because here's the thing no one tells you. Even when someone shatters you, a part of you still aches for who they were to you. I missed the version of Mark who brought me coffee in bed. I missed the warmth of being someone's first call when they got good news. And sometimes, in the middle of scanning a damning invoice, I'd feel this hollow ache like I'd just lost him all over again. But then, I'd remember Sophie's face in that cafe. I'd remember his smirk when I confront. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a dull slate grey, the kind of color that feels like it's holding its breath. I arrived early, walking up the courthouse steps with my head high, every movement deliberate. Inside, the air was heavy with the faint smell of polished wood and stale coffee. Mark was already there, leaning casually against the defendant's table, like he was posing for a promotional photo. His suit was perfectly tailored, his tie an expensive navy silk. He smiled at me, the same smile that had once made me weak in the knees. Today, it barely registered. In his mind, this was just a routine divorce settlement, a formality. He'd walk out with most of the assets, I'd get a polite pat on the head, and he'd take Sophie out for celebratory champagne. What he didn't know was that I had spent months building a case so airtight it could choke him. My attorney, Ms. Aldridge, a woman with a steel spine and the patience of a sniper, opened her folder with surgical precision. "Your Honor," she began, "before we address the financial distribution, we have evidence relevant to the respondent's, Mr. Reynolds' legal conduct." Mark's smirk didn't falter. Not yet. She laid it out in layers, just like we'd rehearsed. First, the financial records, copies of falsified invoices from subcontractors, the amounts inflated and later funneled into personal accounts. Then, the tax documents, showing underreported income and off-the-books cash transactions. The paper trail was impossible to ignore. Every page was time-stamped, signed, irrefutable. Mark shifted in his seat. Then came the harassment complaints. 3 of them, each supported by signed NDAs and settlement checks. Ms. Aldridge didn't need to read them aloud. She simply slid them forward for the judge to review. The silence more damning than any words could be. And the final blow, an archived email chain between Mark and a business partner, openly discussing a bed-rigging scheme for a major municipal contract. By the time she was done, the smugness had drained from his face like water from a cracked glass, and then the twist. Sitting quietly in the second row was a man with a press badge clipped to his jacket pocket. A journalist from the state's largest investigative news outlet. I'd sent him an anonymous package weeks ago, complete with everything I had. He'd called it career-making material. He was live tweeting every revelation in real time. By the third damning document, the courtroom gallery was buzzing with the faint, telltale hum of phones vibrating. Mark's phone, face down on the table, began lighting up with incoming messages. I could see the preview text on the screen. "Call me. This is bad. We're implicated in this. We need to talk now. His business partners, the ones whose names were sprinkled liberally throughout those fraudulent contracts, the ones who were suddenly realizing that if Mark went down, he'd take them with him. The judge raised a hand. Given the nature of this evidence, I am ordering all of Mr. Reynolds' personal and business accounts to be frozen pending a full investigation. Additionally, the court will be forwarding these documents to the district attorney's office for review. Mark's jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his teeth grind. Behind him, Sophie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. When the recess was called, she stood to leave. And that's when the photographers waiting outside the courtroom doors pounced. Flashes went off like fireworks, their lenses trained on her face. She ducked her head, but it was too late. Her name was already trending online beside his. Mark turned to me, eyes burning. He leaned forward just enough so only I could hear him. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I held his gaze, my voice steady. "I already did. That's why you're here." For the first time since I'd met him, he had no comeback. The bailiff called for order, and the hearing continued. But it was just noise to me now. My work was done. The evidence was public. The investigation was inevitable, and his carefully constructed empire was crumbling in full view of the people who'd once called him untouchable. As I walked out into the cool afternoon air, the grey clouds finally broke, spilling sunlight across the courthouse steps. My phone buzzed in my pocket, not with fear this time, but with the sound of doors unlocking. Not his, mine. It didn't take long for the rest to unravel. Within 3 weeks of the hearing, Mark's construction company was under full legal scrutiny. Investigators froze not just his accounts, but the accounts of 3 of his closest business partners. Contracts were terminated. Suppliers backed out. By the end of the month, his office doors were locked, a bright orange foreclosure notice taped to the glass. Sophie was gone by then. I heard from someone, a mutual acquaintance who now texted me instead of avoiding me, that she'd left in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no explanation, just vanished. I imagined the silence in that big, empty house we'd once shared, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel small thinking about it. My own life looked nothing like it had before. The settlement, once it came through, wasn't huge. He'd buried enough assets to keep me from walking away rich, but it was enough to start over. I moved into a small but bright apartment downtown, with wide windows that caught the afternoon light. I painted the walls myself, every brush stroke feeling like a reclamation. I started a bookkeeping side business out of my living room. At first, it was just a few clients, small shops and independent contractors who needed someone they could trust. Word spread quickly. The same people who once believed Mark without question were now sliding into my inbox, asking if I was taking on new clients. Some of them apologized for not believing me sooner. Some didn't. I didn't need them to. I began saying yes to coffee invites again, to dinners, to afternoons spent wandering the farmer's market with people who had seen me through the worst and still stayed. Slowly, I was relearning the sound of my own laughter, the kind that didn't feel like it had to be rehearsed. But the most important shift wasn't in my address or my income. It was in the way I understood myself. For so long, the most dangerous thing I did was stay quiet. I thought silence made me strong, dignified. I thought it kept the peace. But all it really did was give someone like Mark the room to rewrite my story in his own words. I wasn't born vengeful. I didn't come into this world knowing how to gather evidence, how to dismantle a man's life piece by piece without leaving a fingerprint. But betrayal has a way of teaching you new skills, survival skills. And survival, I've learned, doesn't always look like retreat. Sometimes it looks like standing in the open and daring someone to try you again. I never felt joy at his destruction, not once. The day his company officially dissolved, I didn't pop champagne or call anyone to celebrate. I just sat on my couch, the afternoon sun spilling across the floor, and breathed, not shallow, panicked breaths like I had in the beginning, not the held back, careful breaths of someone waiting for the next blow, just breathing freely. Mark Reynolds would never be able to touch me again. Not my money, not my reputation, not my peace. And that, more than anything, was enough. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I found myself driving past the edge of town, the way I used to on grocery runs or late night takeout runs for Mark. I didn't plan it. My hands just turned the wheel. The house sat there at the end of the lane, the wild roses at the fence now nothing but brittle, thorny tangles. The porch sagged more than I remembered, paint peeling in long, tired strips. The windows were dark, the blinds half cocked like no one had cared enough to fix them. A foreclosure notice still clung to the front door, weathered from months of wind and rain. It was strange, standing on that porch. I had once imagined raising children here, hosting holidays, growing old with someone I thought would protect me. Now it was just an empty shell, a monument to what happens when you build your life on lies. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I could already picture the hollow rooms, the dust settling over the spaces where furniture once stood, the faint echo of voices that didn't matter anymore. I stood there long enough to let the memories pass through me without catching. The good ones didn't sting anymore. The bad ones didn't suffocate me. They were just gone. As I turned to leave, I thought about that word Sophie had used in the cafe, peace. They had asked for calm, as if my silence would keep their world intact. But calm is mercy, and I don't give mercy to people who burn me alive. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, the wind picking up in the trees. As I drove away, I didn't look back again, because some things aren't worth revisiting twice.